We'll now hear the presentations from EMF-OFF and Marcel Durand. We'll hear each presentation, which could be followed by questions by the commissioners to all participants. We'll begin with the presentation by EMF-OFF. Please introduce yourself, and you have 10 minutes for your presentation.
So, can you hear me okay? Thanks. My name is Tracy Ariel, and I am a board member of CFE-MF, which is CME Sécuritaire, which is a nonprofit also known as EMF-OFF. Is there anyone in Canada untouched by the final tour of the Tragically Hip? We all danced and sang with Gord Downey as he belted out "You're ahead by a century." This phrase summarizes how I've been feeling as I listen to the mobile industry reps talk about their inability to face competition, while at the same time assuring us all that they have the knowledge and capability to roll out 5G safely. I don't believe them. I'm here to speak on behalf of Canadians who love the benefits and fear the risks of cell phone mobility technology. We need you to work for us. And at this point, that means ensuring that every jurisdiction in Canada contains safe public spaces where anyone can go to escape electromagnetic fields. Tragically Hip lead singer Gordon Edgar Downey died in October 2017 of primary glioblastoma, an aggressive and terminal brain cancer. Just last month, Neil Peart, the iconic Rush drummer, died of the same disease. These deaths of my contemporaries remind me of my friend Larry. Lawrence Jackson, a Newfoundland-based writer known for his staunch defense of copyright, died of a brain tumor in 2003 when he was only 54 years old. I have an award in his name on my wall, and often I wonder how much better Canada would be if he'd lived a little longer. Now, it hasn't been proven that these particular deaths were caused or hurried along by electromagnetic field exposure, but it's likely. When I was a kid, it seemed as though most people who died young did so of heart attacks, strokes, lung cancer, and suicide. Today, brain cancer seems more prevalent. That's why I'm open to learning about the work of Dr. Leonard Hardell, a Swedish oncologist known for discovering cancers caused by Agent Orange exposure. Hardell's testimony helped judges on Italy's Supreme Court understand that the brain tumor on the left side of business executive Innocenzo Marcolini's head came from holding his cell phone on that side while he took notes with his right hand. Reading Hardell's studies makes me wonder how many more Gords, Neils, and Larrys we're going to lose in the coming years. It infuriates me to listen to the industry's attempt to malign Hardell's work. As you listen to them, please remember that the makers of technology always fight attempts to make it safer. It took 200 years and 30 deaths in a single incident before regulations to protect people from decompression sickness passed in 1904. Canadians can't wait that long for protection from 5G. Canadians in every jurisdiction across Canada need public spaces where people can be safe from electromagnetic fields. Do any such spaces exist now? If not, you'll have to remove the licenses of emission operators in otherwise clean spaces. We're already in trouble because there are already tons and tons of 3 and 4G emitters sending electromagnetic emissions into public spaces. Also, private and public enterprises across Canada are already installing 5G emitters on their properties, and these emit into public spaces too. My friend Luke has a pacemaker, and he says he can tell me exactly where they're located because his heart starts racing whenever he gets within range. Instead of ensuring timely deployment of 5G, as the Federation of Municipalities said it wants you to do, Canadians need you to ban 5G implementation in public spaces like the municipality of Sutton already has. We need to figure out safety first. We need to embrace the precautionary principle. We can't simply keep experimenting on people until they suffer and die like Gord, Neil, and Larry did. Thank you.
My name is Magda Havis. I'm Professor Emerita at Trent University in Ontario, and I've been doing research on the biological and health effects of electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic radiation for the past 25 years. Today, what I'd like to do is focus on the health effects to both plants and animals and also to humans. And I'd like to end by providing some warnings from different groups. When it comes to health effects, they fall into three categories. One is cancer, the other is reproductive problems, the third is something called neurohormonal disorders, and that's collectively called electrohypersensitivity. When it comes to cancer, we have evidence from occupational exposure. In the slide that you can see here, everything in red are the different types of cancers that I'm referring to. We also have an increased risk of cancer for people who live near antennas. That includes both broadcast and cell phone antennas. The closer they live, the greater the risk of developing cancers, the most common of which is leukemia. And you can see on the slide the different countries where these studies have been performed. We also have cell phones, and there are a variety of cancers that have been associated with them. I draw your attention to gliomas because that's going to come up time and again. It's a very critical cancer that I'd like to talk about. If cell phones are so dangerous, why do we not see a rapid increase in brain tumors? And the answer is we are seeing a rapid increase in brain tumors. They've been presented in the United Kingdom and in California. And it turns out the tumor that increases the most rapidly is a glioblastoma multiforme. It's a stage 4 glioma brain tumor. And it increases from 1995 to 2015, it's increased almost fourfold. And it increases in the frontal and temporal lobe of the brain, which is where the levels of microwave radiation are the highest from cell phones. In 2011, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified electromagnetic radiation as a possible human carcinogen. What was missing at the time were large-scale animal studies. Since that time, we have 2 additional studies that they've referred to. What they had access to was the U.S. Air Force study in 1992 that looked at the same frequency we use for Wi-Fi, and they looked at it in laboratory rats and found there was a 100% increase in metastatic tumors. These are tumors that move from one part of your body to another part of your body. And there was a 260% increase in primary tumors. What they also noticed was that the immune system was impaired in the laboratory animals, and this comes up time and again as well. We have 2 studies that came out in 2018. These are long-term animal studies. One was from the U.S. National Toxicology Program. The other was from Italy. They looked at cell phone frequencies in the 900 megahertz and 1800 megahertz range. And what they found, there was an increase in gliomas, the brain tumor, and a heart schwannoma, which is a tumor of the heart that's really quite uncommon. We also have evidence for reproductive problems, mostly effects on sperm and miscarriages, and also behavioral problems with children who are exposed in utero. When the fetus is exposed in utero, there are potential increases in things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. When it comes to electrohypersensitivity, there are a variety of symptoms that have been documented. You can see them here in this particular slide. And in 2018, the World Health Organization came out with the International Classification of Diseases showing injury from radiofrequency radiation. So we now have a code that medical doctors can use when they're treating patients with electrical hypersensitivity. We think about 3% of the population is severely affected, implying that they could not be in an environment like this with Wi-Fi around them. And about a third of the population has mild to moderate symptoms. And if you look at the numbers for Canada, we're talking about 1 million people who have severe electrohypersensitivity. When it comes to plants, we've done research looking at the effect of Wi-Fi on plants. And we see here peas. On the right-hand side, you can see that the peas are growing quite nicely. This was a control condition. In the other side, these were exposed to Wi-Fi. Their root systems are simply not growing. There's been a lot of studies looking at birds, bees, amphibians. We did a study with bee population exposing it to microwave radiation, and we found that the bees became extremely aggressive. I give talks on this topic, and one of the questions I'm asked is if this were true, they would have told us. And they are telling us. We have over 2,000 references going back to 1972 showing harmful biological effects of radiofrequency radiation. Scientists are warning the World Health Organization of some of the biological effects. Manufacturers are asking that devices be kept at minimum of 1 inch away from the body. Insurance agencies are no longer insuring radiofrequency radiation, and various medical authorities are saying that the current standards are unsafe. And we have governments that are beginning to remove Wi-Fi from schools because children should not be exposed to this radiation. In conclusion, what I'd like to say is that we have evidence of harm to plants, animals, and humans at levels that we're currently exposed to, and this is going to increase once 5G is deployed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear the presentation of Monsieur Marcel Durand.
Bonjour. I'll speak in English because it's better for me technically. I'm a resident from Saint-Anne-des-Lacs since 1986. I was diagnosed with CLL, which is chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and I asked my doctor why, and he told me it's the environment. So, we'll begin. In Saint-Anne-des-Lacs, the electrical power grid, sorry, I can't see it. Saint-Anne-des-Lacs, the electric power line was added and to supplement the grid on our village about 25 years ago. It follows my street to connect to the main line on Chemin des Lacs, which is right on the corner of me. The power line was installed close and above my workshop. The architecture of the line, it was not at the proper height. It should have been much higher. A mistake was made. Corrections were performed on the line by Hydro-Quebec in 2017. In 2007, my neighbor across the street from me dies of a quick and virulent cancer. In 2009, my next door neighbor on the north side dies of a sudden cancer. In 2016, my next door neighbor on the south side of me attempted to her life. There was a mistake in the typo, and it's recorded with the police records 4 times. Her husband was diagnosed with cancer also. I don't know which one. And they sold the house in 2017. In Saint-Anne-des-Lacs, a cell tower for Rogers, Telus, and Bell was erected and started operating in July 2016. On land that was supposed to be a municipal park, right behind City Hall. I have shielded my house from this tower in order to be able to sleep. Being in my condition, it was the only way for me to live and feel at least at ease in my house, 400 meters from the tower. There are no more Canadian geese on our lakes. We have 23 lakes in Saint-Anne-des-Lacs. No more geese come over in the autumn and the spring. The forest has dried up considerably around us, with static electricity much more prevalent around my house and in the area in the forest. I discontinued the use of propane for cooking and heating for that reason alone. My house was built in 1949. An electrical renovation was made in the late 60s. By adding a smart meter to my house, I risk a fire from that meter in my house, and I'm renovating right now. I'm paraphrasing here because I'm a bit nervous here, but my electric system will be renovated when I can afford it. Shielding my house is also a problem because of the proximity of the tower. I have spent my retirement kitty on this, and I'm struggling to find enough work to complete the electrical renovations. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Pedro Gregorio. I'm a professional engineer with more than 25 years experience inventing and deploying technologies, licensing them to consumer electronic device makers around the world. I've installed our technology in more than 500 million mobile phones, and I also have experience manufacturing satellite systems, including microwave communications antennas. Today, with your indulgence, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about 2 consumer products that are treated in vastly different ways. It's a story of cars and of cell phones. Cars are dangerous. No one denies it. In fact, automobiles are the number 10 killer in Canada. That's higher than liver disease, and more Canadians are killed by cars than by kidney disease, in fact. Vehicle deaths, however, fall into two broad categories. We can speak of direct fatalities from collisions, which are thankfully carefully tracked, reported, and monitored. 1,841 Canadians died in 2017, and 155,000 were injured in vehicle collisions. Not as well known, an equal number of indirect fatalities stem from diseases related to tailpipe emissions. An estimated 1,400 Canadians died in 2015. These numbers are more difficult to track than their estimates. Now, with all of this death and danger, no one proposes banning cars. Rather, ongoing efforts collaboratively by citizens, governments, and industry through regulation, research, technology and infrastructure improvements, and education to promote safety have more than halved fatalities over the last 20 years. That's a 50% reduction from 2000 to 2017, either per vehicle distance or per distance driven. Nevertheless, although there's good collaboration, and as shown by recent so-called Dieselgate scandals, manufacturers are not always reliable advocates for public safety. If we contrast that with cell phones are also dangerous. And here I'm not talking about addiction, increased screen time, distracted driving, or other such direct dangers. But rather, wireless communication devices do emit microwave radiation. And to be clear, this is the exact same form of energy as your microwave oven uses to pop corn or to boil water, albeit at much lower intensities. Such electromagnetic fields are known to harm or kill above so-called safe emission levels, known as thermal levels. However, safe levels for non-thermal exposure have never been adequately assessed, only inferred by studying unsafe levels and assuming that human tissue heats in the same way as boiling a glass of water. Even today, this is still how new phones are tested before commercial release. 6 minutes of exposure, does it heat? That's all. Existing safety guidelines are based on physics rather than on biology, and they predate the first mobile phone. You'll see in your handout a photo of the first Motorola phone from 1984. Even though this was an unsophisticated device, the guidelines used to assess its safety actually predate it. They go back originally to 1960s, where they were left in the hands of military leaders.
I'm sorry.
Please.
Your time is up. You have to conclude. Thank you.
So to conclude, while significant health impacts have been demonstrated from existing generations of wireless, 5G represents a dramatically different type of technology, both in type and in intensity, and its distribution can only exacerbate the dangers that are already documented in many studies. And for these reasons, we urge this Commission to consider phone safety that should mirror car safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of the presentations, and thank you for bringing the issue before us. I have a number of questions about your submissions in relation to the rollout, 5G technology in particular, and your concerns about the rollout. I'll get to that in a second, but I guess I'd like to start. As you're aware, ISED is the body who has responsibility over spectrum, and Health Canada over Safety Code 6. So if I could, can you help me understand what role you believe the Commission can and should play?
Right. The basis of our, Charles O'Brien, Lorix litigation, I'm a lawyer, environmental law. So our position is that this tribunal and the Commission are bound by the Constitution, the rights in the Constitution, and in particular the public trust doctrine, which we tried to explain in some of our filings. In its most simple version, any public land has to be used by government, any government, federal, provincial, or municipal, in a way that preserves it for future generations. There are hundreds of cases where pollution on public lands have been found to be in breach of the public trust doctrine. The specific here is that the doctrine is strongest as concerns highways and roadways in Canada, and the siting of 5G will be on those highways and roadways. And by definition, those lands cannot be used in a manner that would either damage the lands for future generations or cause pollution to humans, flora, and fauna. So it's a constitutional argument. But you are certainly discussing the siting of technology on public highways and roadways, so it's on that basis, as well as the right to protect Canadians against their fundamental rights, whether it's privacy, life, liberty, security of person. All of those, I think, play here, and we feel that you're obliged on that basis to consider the health risks of the siting of 5G and, quite frankly, 4G, 3G, 2G, 1G.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation, but siting does remain an issue under the jurisdiction of ISED, not this commission. On your comments about 5G, so I note in your further comments from November, you made a reference to the fact that 5G technology will, and I quote here, increase exposure to privacy issues for individuals. Can you expand on that for me?
So the nature of 5G, especially with the higher frequencies and the higher data rates, will require distribution of infrastructure that is at a higher density. Some estimates put it at tenfold the density of existing infrastructures. So this will place those infrastructures in closer proximity to citizens and expose them to higher frequencies. The nature of the 5G infrastructures coming into the homes of folks, again, whether they like it or not, and the nature of the data transmitted over it, as well as the services that it enables in terms of Internet of Things and device-to-device communication, will allow the gathering of highly differentiated metadata about use patterns, devices, movements. It'll exacerbate a situation. It won't be a new situation, but it'll exacerbate a situation that already exists. Moreover, as we see constantly in the headlines today, there are lots of legitimate concerns about security in terms of whether or not we get our 5G infrastructure equipment from China. There's a very legitimate and vociferous position expressed about China being able to get access to secure information. Whether it's China or someone else producing these devices, there is a potential for accessing personal communications and personal data about citizens.
Thank you. You may have heard, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to follow the proceeding as we've gone along in the last couple of weeks, but we've asked a number of parties or discussed with a number of parties developments, for example, in South Korea and Germany, where carriers have been mandated or encouraged to joint build a single 5G network. Would that in any way be helpful in addressing some of the concerns and challenges that you have raised in the context of 5G deployment?
Certainly the redundancy of infrastructures for different service providers does provide the opportunity to double, triple, quadruple the exposure of electromagnetic fields. Having said that, 5G on its own, because of the Internet of Things, the greater data rates, the higher density, even a single provider fully building out that system really represents a step-fold increase in the volume, the intensity of radiation, but also the nature of it. The 5G infrastructure is with beamforming antennas and other types of infrastructures will in and of itself cause an increase in intensity. not to be ignored as well is the frequency component. As I said earlier on, these rules were all developed a very long time ago with very old technologies working at vastly lower frequencies. The higher frequencies, some of them approach millimeter wave frequencies, which are known to have direct impacts on human tissue at certain intensities. However, as little as has safety been studied on 1G, 2G, and 3G technologies, there is virtually no safety studies whatsoever that have been done at 5G frequency levels. So that the two components, both the intensities of exposure and the frequencies of those exposure, are of concerns regarding safety, regardless of whether there's a single operator or multiples.
Thank you.
If I may, I would add to that in Great Britain, industry has to fund testing of all equipment. All of Huawei's equipment is tested in Great Britain at Huawei's expense. So that might not be a bad idea here as well.
You have also, in your evidence and remarks, talked a little bit about municipal issues and municipalities' engagement on these issues. Do you participate in municipal meetings, consultations, when the issue of spectrum deployment is discussed?
Right. Well, we've been involved with the town of Sutton, which you might have read about, and the groups there that want to make sure that everything is hardwired to the door, which was an agreement made with all the Eastern Township municipalities. So, yeah, we're involved in that way through public interest groups that are concerned about the health issues of non-wired connections, in particular in Sutton.
So in your experience, is that then an effective forum where, in which to raise these concerns? It seems you've had some success in the Eastern Townships.
I believe the federal government has just told Sutton no, so I think the answer is no.
Federal government, meaning ISED, in terms of siting. And I guess while we're talking about sort of consultative forums, a number of parties have proposed a 5G working group as a potential forum for interested parties to meet and discuss issues. Do you think that forum would be useful with respect to a constructive discussion of the concerns that you're raising with us?
Our belief is that any consultation that brings the issues to the fore and educates Canadians about the reality of these issues is a positive step. I'm ill-equipped to say where such an exercise would lead, but it could lead to greater understanding and potentially allow citizens to make informed decisions and allow regulators as well to make informed decisions. We acknowledge and fully understand that there are many players in Health Canada for safety and ISED for siting, but with regards to allocation of spectrum, especially new spectrum in 5G, we just urge you to recognize that this is not a neutral decision relative to the health of Canadians, nor is it merely an incremental change over previous spectrum allocations. Because of the fundamentally different nature of 5G technologies, both in terms of the electromagnetic spectrum, the intensities, the frequencies, but also the usage patterns that it purports with machine-to-machine Internet of Things, these would represent a step function in the noise, if I may, the electromagnetic noise that would expose Canadians. And while, today it may be reasonable for someone who's sensitive to elect not to use a cell phone, they cannot elect to opt out of infrastructure. And as we move from existing technologies to 5G, the densification of that infrastructure really risks crowding out, especially the electrosensitive individuals. That's why we're here today.
Thank you. Those are all my questions. Panel members, are there any other questions? I thank you very much. I thank you for taking the time to appear before us and for identifying the concerns.